The morning light hit the Grandview Tower lobby like a knife through glass. Everything was marble and steel, expensive marble, the kind that cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent, the kind that reflected everything perfectly, which meant every footprint, every smudge, every imperfection became a small crime. Victoria Pierce didn't see any of that. What Victoria Pierce saw was her phone and her watch, and the way the numbers on her watch were moving faster than her body could move. She was late. Not the kind of late that suggested casual confidence, the kind of late that suggested chaos. And Victoria did not do chaos. She was 37 years old. She ran Apex Development Corporation. She had closed 43 major deals in 12 years. She wore a suit that cost $2,400. Her heels were Italian. Her phone was the newest model. And she was running through the lobby of Grandview Tower at approximately 8.7 miles per hour without looking where she was going. Because in Victoria Pierce's world, other people moved out of her way. They always did. This was the last Tuesday in September. The weather was cool but not cold. The kind of day where you don't need a coat, but you carry one anyway, just to show you can afford to have options. The lobby was busy. Not crowded, but moving. People in expensive business clothes walked with that particular kind of purpose. The kind that suggested they had somewhere very important to be. A few construction workers moved through the space. They carried blueprints and equipment. Nobody was paying attention to anyone else. This was the kind of building where people passed through each other like ghosts. All present, but none of them truly there. Marcus Coleman was one of those construction workers. He was 42 years old. His skin was the deep brown of someone who had spent half his life in the sun, building things that would outlast him. He wore a high-visibility vest over a gray work shirt. His jeans had dust on them. Not the fashionable kind of dust that suggested rugged authenticity, but the actual dust of actual work. His boots were construction boots, thick and heavy, the kind designed to protect your feet from things that could break them. In his right hand, he held a 5-year-old girl named Zara. In his left hand, he carried a tube of blueprints. It weighed maybe 4 pounds, but it represented 6 months of planning, 3 weeks of revisions, and the future of the entire ground floor renovation project. Zara was quiet this morning. She usually was in the mornings. She wasn't much of a talker before 10 a.m. And Marcus had learned to respect that about his daughter. She had her mother's temperament in that way, deliberate, thoughtful, not prone to filling silence with noise. They were moving slowly, deliberately. Marcus wasn't rushing. He had timed this precisely. The elevator would be here in approximately 90 seconds. The meeting on the 47th floor would start at 10 a.m. He would arrive at 9:57 a.m. Because arriving at 10 a.m. exactly was unprofessional, and arriving at 10:02 a.m. was disrespectful. Marcus Coleman did not do unprofessional or disrespectful. Not anymore. He had spent enough of his life being underestimated. Victoria Pierce was not thinking about any of this, because Victoria Pierce did not know this man existed. She was thinking about the meeting, about the fact that Grandview Tower was the crown jewel of the property development world, a 48-story glass and steel structure that had become iconic in the city's skyline over the past 20 years. She was thinking about the fact that Mr. Grandview, the mysterious owner, was finally willing to sell. The rumors had been circulating for 6 months. The official announcement had come 3 weeks ago. Apex Development had been preparing for this moment since before it was official. Victoria had researched everything: the building's history, the current tenancy, the market value, the renovation potential, the zoning laws, the investor appetite. She had 17 folders on her laptop. She had memorized the floor plans. She knew the dimensions of every window, the exact load capacity of every beam, the structural integrity reports from the last 3 years. What she did not know was that the man who owned the building was approximately 6 feet tall. What she did not know was that he had a deep voice. What she did not know was that he had a 5-year-old daughter. And what she did not know was that he was at that exact moment walking approximately 30 feet away from her, moving in a perpendicular direction through the lobby. The coffee cup in her hand was from the cafe on the corner. She'd grabbed it at 9:03 a.m., which was exactly 4 minutes before she should have left her hotel room. The coffee was still hot. The cup was made of paper, which meant it had some structural integrity, but not much. It was the kind of cup designed to hold liquid for approximately 12 minutes, before the heat began to weaken the bottom. Victoria's right foot caught the corner of a marble tile. At the exact moment Marcus rounded the corner. The collision happened in 3/4 of a second. First, Victoria's shoulder hit Marcus's chest. Second, her coffee cup came free from her hand. Third, gravity took over. The espresso described an arc through the air, like a small brown meteor. It fell for maybe 2 seconds. Enough time for both of them to register what was happening. Enough time for Zara's eyes to go very wide. Enough time for Victoria's brain to process that she was about to have to explain a stain on her suit jacket. The coffee hit the marble floor first. Then it splashed. The liquid spread across the pristine white stone, like a slow-motion explosion. It covered maybe 4 square feet. Some of it rolled toward the nearest wall. Some of it splashed upward, creating a spray pattern that would have been interesting to a forensic investigator, and was deeply offensive to Victoria Pierce. A few drops hit Marcus's boots. 2 drops landed on Victoria's right heel, one of the Italian ones, the one that had cost $485, the one that was now spotted with what looked like a minor disaster. For approximately 1 second, both of them stood very still. Marcus's grip on Zara's hand tightened slightly. He could feel his daughter's small palm begin to sweat. He could sense the immediate calculation happening in her brain, the part where she wondered if this meant they were in trouble. Victoria looked at the stain on her heel. Then she looked up. What she saw at first was a construction worker. Tall, large, black, wearing a safety vest, carrying a tube of plans, holding a child. What she saw was a category, not a person. Her brain made a series of immediate calculations. It did this without her conscious permission. It did it the way brains do when they've been trained for a long time to sort people into hierarchies. Vest equals maintenance, construction, service level, below her. Black plus vest equals probably overestimated his own importance. Holding a child plus vest equals single father. Probably struggling. Probably doesn't make much. These calculations happened in the spaces between heartbeats. They happened in the silence of her synapses. They happened the way such calculations had been happening her entire life. And then, because this was who Victoria Pierce was, she made a choice. She did not say, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. That was entirely my fault." She did not say, "Are you okay? Is your daughter okay?" She did not say, "Let me pay for your dry cleaning." Instead, she looked at him with an expression that suggested he had personally disappointed her, and she said nothing at all. Marcus waited. He had learned how to wait. He had learned how to hold space for other people's anger. He had learned how to swallow his own. "I'm so sorry," he said. His voice was calm, deep, the kind of voice that suggested he had learned long ago not to let his emotions leak out through his words. "Are you hurt?" He was already reaching into his pocket. He was looking for his handkerchief. A real one. White cotton. The kind his mother had taught him to carry when he was 12 years old. Back when she'd said, "Son, you're going to be moving through spaces where people expect you to clean up after them. Make sure you're prepared." He crouched down slightly, trying to wipe the coffee from her shoe. It was a gesture of service. It was also a gesture that had been performed by his ancestors thousands of times. It was the gesture of a man making himself small. Victoria watched his hand approach her heel, and then, in a moment, that would later echo through both of their lives, in ways neither of them could have predicted. She did something that her body understood before her conscious mind did. She kicked his hand away, not gently. The heel of her Italian shoe connected with his palm, with enough force that she heard him exhale sharply. Zara made a small sound, not quite a cry, but the precursor to one, the sound of a 5-year-old who has just learned that the world contains people who will hurt her father. "Don't you dare touch me," Victoria said. Her voice was shrill. It bounced off the marble. Several people in the lobby paused and looked over. "Look what you did. This suit costs more than your entire life." Marcus stood up slowly. He pulled Zara behind him, not away from Victoria, but between him and the potential for more of her. It was a protective gesture. It was also a gesture that said, "I'm taking my daughter out of your presence now." "It was an accident," Marcus said. His voice was still level, still calm, still not giving anything away. "You ran into me." Victoria laughed. It was the kind of laugh that had no joy in it. It was the kind of laugh that was designed to make other people feel small. "I ran into you," she said. "Please, look at you. You don't belong here. You're probably just here to beg for change or steal copper wire." She leaned in close. Her face was approximately 12 inches from his face. Her eyes were very bright. "This is a place of business, not a shelter for people like you," she said. "Clean this up or I will have security drag you and that brat out to the street." There was a moment. Just a moment. Where Marcus's grip on the blueprint tube tightened. Where the muscles in his jaw clenched so hard that she could see the physical evidence of his anger, the proof that she had reached him. But that moment passed. He swallowed. He breathed. He looked at his daughter's face. He saw the fear there. He saw the way her small body had become very still. "I am not the janitor," Marcus said quietly. "And I am not cleaning up a mess that you made." Victoria's jaw dropped. She wasn't used to being told no. She was especially not used to being told no by someone in a safety vest, someone who was clearly below her, someone who should have been grateful for the opportunity to serve. Her face turned a color that was somewhere between red and purple. "Excuse me," she shrieked. "Excuse me." She pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen aggressively, her fingers moving like weapons. "I don't think you understand how the world works," she said. "I am a CEO. I am here to buy this building and you are nobody. You are a liability. You are a problem." She glared at the security desk in the corner. There was a man standing there, large and gray-haired, name tag reading Joseph. He was watching them, not intervening, but watching. "Hey you," Victoria called out. "Why is this man still here? He assaulted me. He ruined my property. I want him removed immediately." Joseph started to move. He was a good man. He had worked in the Grandview Tower for 6 years, and he knew exactly who Marcus Coleman was. He knew it because Mr. Coleman came through these doors regularly. He knew it because 3 years ago, when Joseph's daughter had gotten sick and he couldn't afford the treatment, Mr. Coleman had quietly paid for it, not because of any business obligation, just because he could. Joseph opened his mouth, and then Marcus held up a hand, just a small gesture, a subtle signal that said, "Let me see how far she'll go." Marcus wanted to understand something. He wanted to see in this moment what this woman was truly capable of. He wanted to know whether this was a moment of stress, a moment of panic, or whether this was who she actually was. Victoria took his silence as encouragement. "You see," she said, gesturing at Joseph, then back at Marcus. "You're in trouble now. I bet you have a record. Boys like you always do. Aggressive, violent, unable to follow simple rules. You probably came in here planning to cause problems. Probably planning to—" She looked down at Zara. Zara was standing very still. Her hand was gripping her father's pant leg so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her eyes were filling with tears, tears that she was trying very hard not to let fall, because she was 5 years old, and she had already learned that sometimes if you cry, things get worse. It's a shame, Victoria continued, looking at the small girl. Someone should probably call social services. Raising a child in that environment? This girl deserves better than a father who drags her into high-end buildings to cause scenes. That was the moment where something changed in Marcus's chest. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been cleaner. Rage would have given him permission to do something. What he felt instead was a kind of cold clarity. It was the feeling of standing on the edge of something, and realizing that if he took one more step, he would fall into a place he didn't want to go. He crouched down. He ignored Victoria completely for a moment. He wiped a tear from Zara's cheek with his thumb. It was a gesture so gentle, so full of protection, that it landed like a punch to every person who was watching. "It's okay, baby girl," he whispered. "This lady is just having a very bad day. We're going to go upstairs now. Daddy has a meeting." Then he stood up to his full height. He was tall. Not just tall, but the kind of tall that came with substance, with presence, with a kind of quiet authority that had nothing to do with the vest he was wearing. He looked Victoria directly in the eyes. "You are here to buy this building?" he asked. His voice was dangerously low. It was the kind of voice that suggested he was choosing his words with extreme care. "I am," Victoria spat back. "I'm meeting the owner, Mr. Grandview, and when I tell him that he allows trash to wander his lobby, he will fire whoever let you in." Marcus nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand the full architecture of her assumptions. He could see exactly how she had sorted him. He could see the categories she had put him in. And he could see that none of those categories included the possibility that he was anything other than what he appeared to be. "Is that so?" he said. His tone was almost conversational. "Well then, I suppose I shouldn't keep you. Don't be late." He took Zara's hand and walked past Victoria, heading directly for the executive elevators on the east side of the lobby. Victoria scoffed. "Hey," she called out, "you can't use those. Those are for VIPs only." But Marcus didn't look back. He walked with the kind of certainty that suggested he knew exactly where he was going, and exactly where he belonged. When he reached the elevator, he pressed his palm against the security scanner. The device beeped. It beeped green. The elevator doors slid open. And as they closed, Victoria was left standing in the middle of the Grandview Tower lobby, holding her phone, staring at a reflection of herself in the polished marble, looking very much like a woman who had just made a mistake she didn't yet understand. The elevator rose silently. 47 floors, from the ground level to the executive offices, from the place where she had made her choice, to the place where she would have to live with the consequences. Marcus didn't speak. He was very good at not speaking. He stood with Zara beside him, her small hand in his. He could feel the rapid pulse of her fear through her fingertips. He could feel her body vibrating slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline, from the activation of her nervous system, from the understanding that something bad had happened. And she wasn't entirely sure what it was. "Daddy," Zara said softly. Her voice was very small. "Was she mean?" Marcus looked down at his daughter. She was wearing the dress she had picked out this morning, purple with small white stars. She was wearing the shoes he had bought her last week. She was 5 years old, and she should not have to understand what had just happened. But she did. "Yes, baby," Marcus said. "She was mean." "Why?" This was the question that Marcus had learned to dread. The why question. The one that required him to explain the world as it was. Which meant explaining to his daughter that sometimes people treated you badly because of what you looked like, because of what you wore, because of what they thought about you, before they even knew you. Because she was scared, Marcus said finally. Scared people sometimes hurt other people. It makes them feel bigger. Zara thought about this. But you're already big, she said. Marcus felt something break open in his chest. He pulled his daughter close. He kissed the top of her head. And he made a decision right there in that elevator, rising toward the 47th floor. He decided that he was not going to let this moment, this small, insignificant moment in the grand scheme of his life, become the story that his daughter told herself about how the world worked. He decided that he was not going to let Victoria Pierce's cruelty become a defining narrative. The elevator doors opened. 30 minutes earlier, Victoria had been in the women's restroom on the ground floor of Grandview Tower. She had been standing in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection, and she had been talking to herself, in the quiet way that people do when they're alone, and they want to believe that they're in control. The restroom was pristine. Everything in Grandview Tower was pristine. The tiles were white marble with thin veins of gray running through them. The sinks were chrome and glass. The soap dispensers were automatic. There was even classical music playing softly through hidden speakers. The kind of music designed to make you feel like you were somewhere important. Victoria had been looking at herself in the mirror, and she had been thinking about mirrors in general. How they never lied. How they showed you exactly who you were, without any possibility of distortion or manipulation. But that wasn't quite true, was it? Mirrors showed you what you looked like. They didn't show you what you were. Victoria had seen a woman in a $2,400 suit. A woman with perfect posture. A woman with perfect hair. A woman with confidence that radiated from her like heat. What she hadn't seen was the insecurity. The part of her that still at age 37 felt like she was pretending, like she was playing a role that required her to be bigger and louder and more certain than she actually felt. She had fixed her hair, even though it hadn't needed fixing. She had reapplied her lipstick, even though it was still perfect. She had straightened her jacket, even though it was already straight. These were the rituals of a woman preparing for battle. "You've got this," she had said to her reflection. "Grandview Tower, the biggest deal of your career, the thing that's going to put you on the list, the thing that's going to make you untouchable." She had smiled at herself, a practiced smile, a smile that she had perfected over 17 years. 17 years of boardroom meetings, 17 years of investor pitches, 17 years of moments where she had to convince powerful men that she was worth listening to. The smile had worked. It always did. She had walked out of that restroom with her head high, her shoulders back, and she had felt invincible. That was before the collision. Now walking toward the conference room, Victoria was in the process of deciding how to frame what had happened in the lobby. It was important she had decided to control the narrative. It was important to make sure that the incident with the construction worker, the incident, did not become a story that reflected badly on her. She could spin it. She could make it funny, actually. She could tell the board that she had been so focused on this important meeting that she had literally run into someone. She could laugh about it. She could turn it into a story about her dedication, her focus, her singular determination to win. The construction worker had been aggressive. The construction worker had been disrespectful. The construction worker had needed to be put in his place, because that's what people like him needed. Boundaries, structure, understanding of hierarchy. By the time Victoria reached the penthouse conference room, she had rewritten the story entirely. The incident was no longer about her kicking a man's hand away. It was about her teaching a lesson. It was about her maintaining standards. It was about her being the kind of woman who did not accept disrespect. And that was the kind of woman who bought buildings. She believed her own story. This was her gift and her curse. She was very good at believing things about herself, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. The penthouse conference room of Grandview Tower was designed to intimidate. The table was mahogany, and it was enormous. It stretched across approximately 20 feet of the room's center. The chairs surrounding it were leather, Italian, expensive. The windows were floor to ceiling. They showed the city spread out below, like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. The lighting was soft but not dim, bright but not harsh. Everything about the space suggested that important decisions were made here, the kind of decisions that affected thousands of people, the kind of decisions that mattered. Victoria walked into this space and felt the familiar rush of power. She was here. She was actually here. In the penthouse conference room of Grandview Tower, about to negotiate the biggest deal of her life. She sat at the table. Her team arranged themselves around her like courtiers. Lawyers on the left, financial advisors on the right, her VP Daniel sitting next to her with his tablet open and his expression carefully neutral. Across from them sat the board of directors of Grandview Development. There were 5 of them. Eleanor Hart was the one who had been in the lobby earlier. She was 63 years old. She had been working with Mr. Grandview for 23 years. She had gray hair that she wore pulled back in a severe bun. She had intelligent eyes that suggested she had seen a lot and been surprised by very little. She was the kind of woman who made other women nervous, and Victoria made a mental note to be especially careful around her. The other 4 board members were composed of 2 men in their 50s, 1 woman in her 60s, and 1 younger man who looked like he might be in his early 40s. All of them carried themselves with a kind of quiet authority. All of them looked like they had closed deals that Victoria hadn't even known existed. None of them looked particularly impressed. Miss Pierce Eleanor said, checking her watch. "Thank you for being here. Mr. Grandview is extremely punctual. He should be here any moment." Victoria nodded. She was thinking about the construction worker. She was thinking about how she would tell this story. "While we wait," she said, leaning back in her chair, "I just had the most interesting encounter in the lobby of this building." She gestured dramatically, as if the lobby was a stage, and she was describing a theatrical production. There was a construction worker, she continued, clearly not belonging here, clearly wandering where he shouldn't be. When I suggested he leave, he actually became aggressive with me. Can you imagine? I had to call security. She laughed. It was the laugh of someone who expected others to find the situation absurd, the laugh of someone who expected to be believed. Daniel, her VP, laughed along. He had learned long ago that laughing when Victoria laughed was a good strategy for keeping his job. The board members did not laugh. Eleanor exchanged a glance with one of the other board members, the woman in her 60s. The glance was brief, but loaded with information. "How unfortunate," Eleanor said. Her tone suggested that she found nothing about the situation amusing. "Well," Victoria said, crossing her legs. Someone needed to teach him about boundaries. People like that, they think they can just wander into any space. They have no understanding of hierarchy, no sense of where they belong. She was building a narrative. She was reinforcing her position as someone who understood this building, who understood power, who understood the natural order of things. The other board members were looking at Eleanor. Eleanor was looking at the door. "Mr. Grandview is very particular about how people are treated in this building," Eleanor said carefully. "He believes that respect is foundational to everything." Victoria didn't register the warning in her words. She was too busy checking her reflection in the polished surface of the table. "Of course," she said dismissively. "Which is why he needs someone like me to run this place. Someone who understands standards. Someone who isn't afraid to set boundaries." The room was quiet. Victoria checked her phone. No messages, no updates. Just a continuation of the day as it had been going. So she said, leaning forward, "Where is Mr. Grandview? I'm eager to show him what I have planned for this space. I was thinking we'd gut the ground floor completely. The lobby is far too open. It lets in the wrong element. Once I take over, I'll make sure this place is more selective about who gets access." One of the board members, a man with silver hair, closed his eyes briefly. It was the kind of gesture that suggested he was praying, or perhaps just trying to prevent himself from saying something he would regret. The woman in her 60s picked up her pen and pretended to write something. She was actually just drawing small circles on her notepad. It was a coping mechanism. Eleanor looked at the door. The heavy mahogany double doors at the end of the conference room were closed. They were the kind of doors designed to convey importance, the kind of doors that suggested that, when they opened, something significant would be revealed. Victoria was thinking about doors. She was thinking about the automatic doors at the bottom of the lobby. She was thinking about how the construction worker had scanned his palm against the elevator panel, and the door had opened. And she had stood there watching, confused, as the elevator rose and took him away from her. She had decided, standing in the lobby, that it didn't matter, that he was nobody, that his access to the executive elevators meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. He was probably a regular maintenance person, someone who had been given access to certain areas because of his job. It didn't reflect anything about him as a person. It didn't mean anything. The doors to the conference room clicked. Eleanor's head turned. "Ah," she said softly. "Here he is." Victoria straightened her suit jacket. She put on her most charming smile. The smile that had closed 43 deals. The smile that suggested she was exactly the kind of person you wanted on your side. Finally, she said, more to herself than to anyone else, "Let's get this over with." The doors swung open. Victoria's brain had been preparing for a specific image. She was expecting an older white man, probably 60s or 70s, probably gray hair, probably wearing a suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe, probably someone from her world, someone she understood, someone she could manipulate. The person who walked through the doors did not match that image. He was tall. He was wearing a black fitted t-shirt. That showed the kind of musculature that came from actual work, not gym membership. He was wearing dusty jeans, construction jeans. The kind of jeans that suggested he had been on an actual job site this morning, doing actual work. He was also black. He was also holding a small child on his hip, a girl, maybe 5 years old, with a juice box in one hand and a coloring book in the other. The girl was humming softly to herself. The girl was completely unaware that she was walking into what would become one of the most significant moments in her father's professional life. Every single member of the board stood up, not slowly, not reluctantly, immediately, like synchronized swimmers, like they had practiced this before, like the entrance of this man was significant enough to warrant standing. "Good morning, Mr. Grandview," Eleanor said. Her voice was respectful. It was reverent. It was the voice of someone speaking to someone they admired. Mr. Grandview. The man in the dusty jeans was Mr. Grandview. Victoria's blood ran cold. No, that wasn't possible. That wasn't the man who had been in the lobby. The man in the safety vest. The man she had kicked. The man she had called a liability. The man she had suggested should be removed from the building. He was the owner. He was the owner. And Victoria had just spent the last 30 minutes telling a room full of his employees that he was a problem. The man set the small child down in the massive leather chair at the head of the table. He produced a coloring book from his back pocket. He had apparently anticipated this, had apparently brought entertainment for his daughter, had apparently planned to bring her to this important meeting. He handed it to her. "Be good for Daddy for 5 minutes." "Okay, sweetheart," he said. His voice was soft. It was patient. It was the voice of a man who loved his daughter. "Okay, Daddy," the girl said cheerfully. Then he stood up to his full height and turned to face Victoria. The silence in the room was the kind of silence that could physically crush you. Victoria was trembling. She had made a mistake, not a small mistake, not a recoverable mistake, a fundamental error in judgment that was now visible to everyone in the room. "Why, she stammered. Her voice was very small. But the vest, the boots. The man placed his hands on the table. "I like to check the foundation of my buildings personally," he said. His voice echoed with authority. It was the voice of someone who had earned the right to speak with certainty. "I built this tower from the ground up. I know every bolt, every beam, and every flaw." He looked her dead in the eyes. "And today I found a major flaw. Not in the building, but in the potential buyer." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Marcus Coleman did not raise his voice. This was in many ways worse than if he had yelled. If he had yelled, it would have been dramatic. It would have fit into the narrative that Victoria had constructed, where she was a victim of his aggression. But he didn't yell. He simply walked slowly around the conference table toward her. And with each step, the space between them seemed to shrink. Victoria tried to stand. Her legs didn't cooperate. She remained seated, looking up at him as he approached. "This morning," he said, his voice low and measured, "you made a choice. You didn't make it by accident. You made it intentionally. You saw a person, and you decided who they were based on what they wore." Victoria opened her mouth. She wanted to explain. She wanted to provide context. She wanted to convince him that she wasn't the person he thought she was. "Let me finish," he said. And she closed her mouth. "You kicked my hand away," he continued, not defensively, not in self-protection. "You kicked it because you wanted me to understand that my touch was beneath you, that I was beneath you, that I didn't deserve to help you even when I was trying to be kind." He stopped walking. He was now standing directly in front of her chair. "You told me I didn't belong in this building. You told my daughter that her father was a problem. You told the board that you would fix this lobby by making sure the wrong kind of people couldn't get in." Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. Tears of someone who had just understood the magnitude of what she had lost. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I was stressed. The meeting, the traffic. I wasn't thinking. I am not a racist person, Mr. Grandview. I have friends who are black. I donate to charities. You called security on me," Marcus said, his voice cutting through her words like a blade. "You looked at my skin and assumed I was a criminal. You looked at my clothes and assumed I was poor. And because you thought I had no power, you treated me like I was garbage that had wandered into your space." He paused. "That is not a misunderstanding, Victoria. That is a revelation of character." The room was absolutely silent. "My daughter was there," Marcus continued, and his voice cracked slightly. "Just a fraction, which somehow made it more powerful. She watched you treat her father like he was worthless. She's 5 years old, and she watched you make a decision about who I am based on your fear." He turned and looked at Zara, who was still coloring her castle, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just become the focal point of this entire exchange. "I'm going to spend years helping her understand that the world is not the way you showed it to her this morning. I'm going to spend years helping her understand that there are people like you, people who are afraid, people who use power to make themselves feel big, people who hurt others because it makes them feel like they have control." He turned back to Victoria. "But here's what I know about myself," he said. "I know that I didn't deserve what you did. My daughter didn't deserve what you did. And I am not going to let you rewrite this moment into something it's not." Victoria tried again to salvage the situation. She talked about the deal. She talked about how much she needed this. She talked about everything she had invested. She begged. She pleaded. She did all of the things that people do when they're facing the loss of something they thought they had secured. Marcus listened to all of it, and then he simply said, "No." He walked back to the head of the table. He picked up Zara, who was still humming to herself. He held his daughter on his hip, the same way he had held her in the lobby, the same way he had held her when she was born, the same way he would hold her for as long as she would let him. He completely ignored Victoria. It was a kind of erasure. It was the withdrawal of his attention, his acknowledgement, his presence. It was worse than anger. It was the simple removal of her from his world. Eleanor Hart stood up. "Miss Pierce," she said, her voice completely level. "The sale is terminated. Your company will be receiving formal notification from our legal team. You are no longer welcome in this building. We ask that you vacate the premises immediately." "But I..." Victoria started. "Immediately," Eleanor repeated. The board members were all standing now, not in a gesture of respect, but in a gesture of finality. The meeting was over. Victoria was over. Marcus didn't even look back as he walked toward the elevator with his daughter on his hip. Victoria's team scrambled to follow her out of the conference room. They grabbed folders and laptops. They made apologies, not to her, but to the board members they passed. They looked at her with a mixture of embarrassment and disgust. Daniel, her VP, didn't even try to hide his relief. This was his opportunity to dissociate himself from her, and he took it immediately. By tomorrow morning, he would have already begun networking for a new job. By the end of the week, he would be gone. Victoria walked through the penthouse, past the floor-to-ceiling windows, past the city that she had thought she was going to conquer. She walked past the elevators that Marcus had entered. She walked toward the emergency stairs instead, unwilling to wait in public for an elevator, unwilling to be seen by the kind people who worked in this building, and would soon know exactly what had happened. The emergency stairs were cold and concrete. They echoed with each step. Victoria descended 47 flights of stairs in designer heels, and by the time she reached the lobby, her feet were aching, and her mind was spinning. The marble floor that had been her undoing was now her exit route. Joseph, the security guard, watched her leave. He didn't try to stop her. He simply watched her go. And then he pressed a button on his phone and told someone to make a note that Victoria Pierce was no longer welcome in the building. The doors to Grandview Tower locked behind her. Outside, the morning continued. The sun was still shining. The city was still moving. The world had not stopped because Victoria Pierce had made a fundamental error in judgment. But something inside her had shifted. By Friday morning, Victoria had lost her job. It had taken exactly 3 days. On Tuesday, she had been a CEO. On Wednesday morning, she had been called into an emergency board meeting at Apex Development. On Wednesday afternoon, she had been asked to resign. On Wednesday evening, she had been escorted out of the building. The official statement was about irreconcilable differences in management philosophy and commitment to inclusive business practices. The unofficial reality was simpler. Victoria had humiliated and insulted a major property owner in his own building, and now she was toxic. By Thursday morning, the story had spread. Not in the mainstream media, not yet anyway, but through the real estate community, through the gossip networks of development companies and investment firms, through the kinds of channels that move information faster than any official news outlet ever could. Victoria Pierce was fired by Apex Development after insulting Marcus Grandview in his own building. She made racist comments to Marcus Grandview. She got caught completely unprepared and tried to talk her way out of it. The details got murkier as the story spread. But the core truth remained. Victoria Pierce had failed, spectacularly. By Friday, she had already received 47 voicemails and text messages, 47 missed calls, every single one of them from people she had thought were her friends, her allies, her supporters. Every single one of them now suddenly unavailable, suddenly too busy to talk, suddenly very concerned about how this reflected on their companies. Victoria spent Friday sitting in her apartment. She had a view of the city. She could see Grandview Tower from her window. She could see the building that she had been so certain she would own. She could see the place where she had made her choice. She tried calling Marcus's office. She got a receptionist who told her that Mr. Grandview was not accepting calls from Ms. Pierce. She tried again. Same result. She tried a third time. The receptionist told her that if she called again, they would report the calls to the police. Victoria stopped calling. Instead, she sat and she thought. She thought about the moment in the lobby when she had kicked his hand away. She thought about what she had been trying to prove in that moment. She thought about the fact that she could have simply said, "Yes, thank you for trying to help," and none of this would have happened. She thought about Zara's face, about the way the small girl had looked at her father with absolute confidence that he would protect her, about the trust in that look, about the fact that Victoria had tried to destroy that trust. She thought about the words she had used. People like you, trash, brat. She thought about all the times she had made the same judgment about other people, all the times she had sorted them into categories, based on what they wore, or what they looked like, or what she assumed about them. She thought about how many other people she had made to feel small, just because she wanted to feel big. At 6:47 p.m. on that same Friday, Marcus Coleman was standing on the roof of Grandview Tower. The sun was setting. The city lights were coming on. The sky was that particular shade of purple-orange. That happens in the moment between day and night, in the moment where the world is caught between two states and hasn't decided which one it's going to be. Zara was holding his hand. She had been quiet all day. Not unusual for Zara. She was a naturally quiet child. But this was different. This was the quiet of someone who had experienced something and was processing it. "Daddy," she said, looking out at the city. Was that lady very bad? Marcus thought about how to answer this question. He thought about all of the ways he could explain Victoria Pierce to his 5-year-old daughter. He thought about how to make sense of cruelty in a way that a 5-year-old could understand. She was scared, he said finally. Scared of what? Of being nobody, Marcus said. Sometimes when people are scared of being nobody, they try to make themselves big by making other people small. She was trying to make herself big by making us small. Zara thought about this. "But you're not nobody," she said. "You built all these buildings." Marcus looked at his daughter. She was 5 years old. She was wearing the purple dress with the white stars. She was holding a juice box that she'd finished hours ago, but didn't want to let go of. She was in every possible way the most important thing in his life. "No," he said. "I'm not nobody, but I wasn't big before I built these buildings. I was big because of who I was. And she couldn't see that because she was too scared to see anything except what she could control." He picked Zara up and set her on his hip. "The thing I want you to understand," he said, "is that what happened today wasn't about me. It was about her. She made a choice. And now she has to live with that choice. But you and me, we get to decide what this moment means. We get to decide whether it's a story about how the world is cruel, or whether it's a story about how your daddy is strong and he protects you. And he doesn't need anyone's permission to be worthy." Zara rested her head against his shoulder. "Which one is it?" she asked. "It's the second one," Marcus said. "It's always going to be the second one." He stood there with his daughter as the sun finished setting. He stood there as the city transformed from the warm tones of daylight to the cool tones of evening. He stood there as the buildings around him lit up one by one, as the skyline became a constellation of lights, as the work of thousands of people became visible, in the form of illuminated windows. Some of those buildings were his. Some of those building projects had come from his design. Some of those structures would stand for decades, centuries maybe, as monuments to the people who had built them. He was not invisible. He was not a liability. He was a man who built things. He was a father who protected his daughter. He was someone who mattered. And most importantly, he was someone who was going to use this moment, this ugly, painful, infuriating moment, to teach his daughter something about what strength actually looked like. Strength wasn't cruelty. Strength wasn't making someone else small so you could feel big. Strength was knowing who you were and not needing anyone else's validation to confirm it. 6 months later, the office was small. That was the first thing Victoria noticed when she walked into her new job. After everything fell apart, after Apex Development had let her go, after all her investors had abandoned her, after the real estate community had collectively decided she was too much of a liability, she had ended up here, a small property management company in the Midwest. Not the kind of company that made the news. Not the kind of company that closed major deals. The kind of company that managed apartment buildings and strip malls, and the kinds of properties that nobody paid attention to. She was making 1/10 of what she had made before. She was working 60-hour weeks instead of 80, which would have felt like a relief. If it wasn't because she was doing actual work, instead of negotiating deals, she was learning properties from the ground level up, literally. She had spent the last month walking through basements and crawl spaces, checking HVAC systems and water pressure. Learning the foundational systems that kept buildings standing, it was humbling. Every time she was tempted to dismiss someone for what they wore, or where they came from. She thought about Zara's face, about Marcus's quiet refusal to let her rewrite the narrative, about the fact that she had made a 5-year-old girl afraid of what her father would experience in the world. Her therapist had suggested that she needed to understand where her need for control had come from. Victoria had discovered through several expensive sessions that her father had spent her childhood making her feel like she wasn't quite good enough. He had always been pushing her towards something more, something bigger, something that would finally make him proud. She had internalized the message that worth came from achievement, from status, from the visible markers of success. And when someone, anyone, seemed to threaten that narrative, she had responded with cruelty, understanding it didn't fix it, but it was a beginning. She had tried multiple times to apologize to Marcus. She had sent flowers. She had written letters. She had tried to contact him through his office. Every single attempt had been rejected. Finally, she had stopped trying. She had accepted through painful experience that some things couldn't be fixed. Some choices had consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. Some damage couldn't be undone, even with the best of intentions. So she had simply tried to become better. She had changed how she spoke to people. She had made a point of noticing people she might have dismissed before. She had started volunteering at a community center, teaching property management to people who wanted to break into the industry. She had started mentoring young women, particularly women of color, who wanted to get into real estate development. It wasn't redemption, it was just trying to be different than she had been. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city entirely, Marcus Coleman was standing in front of a construction site. The sign on the fence read, Grandview Foundation Community Development Project. New housing for existing residents. Quality construction. Opportunity and dignity for all. Zara was standing beside him, now 5.5 years old, older and wiser than she had been 6 months ago. She had started kindergarten. She had made friends. She had begun to understand the world as a place of infinite possibility, which was exactly what Marcus had wanted for her. "Why are we helping people?" Zara asked, looking at the construction site. "Because people deserve good places to live," Marcus said. "And because when I was growing up, there weren't many people who helped my family. I want to be someone who helps. I want to show you what that looks like." He had started the Grandview Foundation 6 months earlier. It had taken the profits from his real estate ventures and funneled them into community projects. It had built new housing in neighborhoods that had been forgotten. It had created apprenticeship programs for young people who wanted to learn construction. It had given opportunities to people who might not otherwise have had them. It had, in other words, become his life's work, not because he was trying to prove anything to Victoria Pierce, not because he needed her forgiveness or her validation, simply because this was the kind of man he wanted to be. This was the man he wanted his daughter to believe he was. Daddy, Zara said, pointing at a worker hammering something in the distance. "Is that one of your buildings?" That's going to be someone's home, Marcus said. That's going to be where a family lives. That's going to be where a kid like you grows up, and I gotta help build it. Zara seemed satisfied with this answer. She went back to her coloring. She always brought her coloring book to construction sites, had appointed herself as the site's official artist, and Marcus stood watching the work continue. The building was going up, brick by brick, beam by beam, exactly the way buildings had always been constructed, with precision, with care, with the understanding that what you were creating would matter to people. One of the construction workers, a young black man named David, came over to ask Marcus a question about the foundation depth. They discussed the specs. They looked at the blueprint together. They made a decision. As David walked away, Marcus thought about the fact that this young man had grown up in a neighborhood where he had been told by people like Victoria that he didn't belong in certain spaces, that he would never be a professional, that he would always be a liability. Now David was learning to be an engineer. He was learning to build things that would last. He was learning that his potential had never been limited by anyone's judgment, only by his own willingness to believe in it. Victoria was sitting in her small office, not her own office, but the company office where she worked, when the email came through. The subject line read, Property Development Industry Recognition Awards. She almost deleted it without reading, but something made her open it. It was a notification that Marcus Grandview had been recognized as one of the most influential property developers in the region. His Grandview Foundation had been featured in multiple publications. His work in community development had become a model for other real estate companies. He was quite simply becoming exactly the kind of person she had tried to make herself into, except that he had done it without crushing other people in the process. Victoria read about his accomplishments. She read about the apprenticeship programs he had created. She read about the young people he was mentoring. She read about a quote from him. I believe that buildings are only as strong as the people who build them, and people are only strong when they feel like they have value. My goal is to create opportunities for people who have been told that they don't belong so they can discover that they've always belonged. Victoria closed the email. She thought about the moment in the lobby. She thought about the choice she had made. She thought about the fact that if she could go back in time, she would make a different choice. But she couldn't go back. She could only move forward. So she went to the construction site outside the office. She looked at the apartment building that her company was managing. She thought about the families who lived there. She thought about the fact that in some small way, she was now helping to create spaces where people could have dignity. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. And that is the story. The story of a man who was underestimated, and who refused to let that underestimation define him. The story of a woman who made a choice, and had to live with the consequences. The story of a small girl who watched her father stand firm in his worth, even when the world tried to convince her that he was anything less. The story of how one moment, one collision, one choice, one act of cruelty can echo through a person's life and teach them something about who they are. Victoria Pierce was never entirely redeemed, but she became better than she had been. And Marcus Coleman learned something too. That true strength isn't about getting revenge on people who hurt you. True strength is about refusing to let their hurt change who you are. True strength is standing in your integrity, protecting the people you love, and continuing to build a better world, even when the world has shown you its cruelty. True strength is Zara growing up knowing that her father is a man of value, that her father is a builder, that her father is the kind of man who doesn't need anyone's permission to matter. That is the real victory, not the loss of a deal, not the fall of a CEO, but the quiet, sustained, everyday choice to be good to people, to build things that matter, to create opportunities for people who have been told they don't belong, to show your daughter and all the young people who watch you what it looks like to have dignity If this story stayed with you, if you found yourself thinking about who you are and what choices you make when no one important is watching, if you found yourself wondering about the people you've dismissed, the people you've made small, the people whose worth you've questioned, if this story did any of those things, then I'm asking you to subscribe to our channel. This is where we tell stories about second chances, about the people who build communities, about the quiet courage it takes to choose dignity over cruelty, respect over dismissal, and kindness over the easy comfort of judgment. Subscribe, because the world needs more people who understand that true strength is measured, not by how big you can make yourself, but by how you treat the people who can do nothing for you.